To begin lesson 5, we are going to talk about terminating and repeating decimals. So to start off with here, I have that Jenna figured out the cost of different fruits per piece and wrote the unit cost as fractions. She wants to write each unit cost as a decimal to show the cost in cents. How can she write these common fractions as decimals? So I have a chart here, and all the unit fractions are given to us, and they want us to write an equivalent fraction. So what we want to do is if we're trying to get to a decimal, we want to write all of our fractions either with the denominator of 10 or a denominator of 100, because if you think about place value, we have tenths and we have hundredths. We also have thousands, but we probably aren't working with fractions that large just yet. So if I look at 1/10, it already has a denominator of 10. So that's good. We don't have to do anything with that. That's what we want. We want a denominator of 10 or 100. Now 5, it goes into 10. So how do I get from 5 to 10? Well, I times by 2. And if I times the bottom number by 2, I have to do that same thing to the top number. So 1 times 2 is 2. Then I have 1/4. 4 does not go into 10 evenly, but it does go into 100. So I'm going to make the denominator 100 here. And 4 times 25 is 100. And if I times the bottom by 25, I have to times the top by 25. So 1 times 25 is 25. And then I have 1/2. The denominator of 2 does go into 10, so we can use 10. We'd have to times by 5, so I have to times the top by 5. 1 times 5 is 5. And then there's a 4 again, doesn't go into 10, so we have to use 100. And we're going to times by 25 on the top and the bottom. And 3 times 25 would be 75. So there are the equivalent fractions. Now we have to write those as a decimal. Well, if you read this fraction, the first fraction is 1/10. Well, 1/10 in decimal is 0.1. 2/10 would be 0.2. 25 hundredths would be 0.25. You'd use 2 place values. And then 5/10 would be 0.5. And our last one is 75 hundredths. So we have to have 2 place values, so we have to put 0.75 for that. So if the fraction that you're working with can be changed into a denominator of 10 or 100, then it's easier to change into a decimal from that form. So moving on, a couple of vocab words here. I talked about them at the beginning, a terminating decimal and repeating decimal. Terminating decimals are numbers that can be written as decimals that end. So they don't keep going, they stop. So an example would be 0.25 or 25 hundredths. It stops. There's no numbers after that 5. So it ends. A repeating decimal is one that keeps going with the same pattern. So it goes on forever with the same pattern. So I put a couple of examples here. 0.3 repeating, and that line above indicates that that is repeating. And then I have 0.215, and you notice that line goes over the 2, 1, and the 5. So that means that decimal will keep going 215, 215, 215. So terminating stops, repeating keeps going on forever with the same pattern. Also here, I highlighted something that's very, very, very important. A fraction bar means division. So when you see a fraction, so for example, 1/2, it is a fraction and you say it 1/2, but it really means 1 divided by 2. So that fraction bar is division. It's kind of like when we were doing adding and subtracting integers. A minus sign is also the same thing as a negative sign. So don't forget that. Keep that in your mind somewhere because you are going to use it a lot for this lesson in the next few days. So example 1, it says find a decimal for 3/15 without doing long division. Well, looking at this fraction, 3/15. 15, I can't multiply anything to get 10, and I can't multiply anything to get 100, but I do notice that I could reduce this fraction because 3 and 15 have a 3 in common. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 3. And I'm going to have 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 15 divided by 3 is 5. Now I can take that fraction and multiply it by 2, so I can have a 10 at the bottom. So 5 times 2 is 10, and at the top, 1 times 2 would be 2. And 2/10 written as a decimal would look like 0.2. So you don't always have to divide to figure out the decimal version of a fraction. There are other ways around that. Example 2, the teacher has 4 cups of broth to share among 3 students. How much broth will each student get? So there's a total of 4 cups. So we are going to have 4, and we're going to divide that among, or share it among 3 students. So we're going to divide that by 3. So if I wrote that as a fraction, it would look like 4/3. Now, 4/3 is improper because the top number is larger than the bottom number. So if I write it properly, 3 goes into 4 one time, so that's a whole number. And I'm at 3, so I got to get to 4, so I have 1 left over, and my denominator is a 3. So each student is going to get 1 1/3 cup of broth. Example 3, it says one restaurant uses 4 quarts of soup to make 16 equal servings, and another restaurant uses 8 quarts of soup to make 30 equal servings. Which restaurant has larger servings of soup? Write a division expression to represent the problem and then solve. First restaurant has 4 quarts, and they're going to divide that up into 16 servings. So we have 4 divided by 16. And it says write division expression, so that's what that would look like. And then the second restaurant has 8 quarts, and they're going to divide that among 30 servings. And there's the other division expression. So if I wrote those as fractions, this one would look like 4/16, and this one would look like 8/30. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce these fractions. 4/16, both of those numbers can be divided by 4. And I would have 1/4. And 8/30 is even, so I'm going to go ahead and cut both of those numbers in half, or divide by 2. So I would have 4/15. Now, 1/4, a quarter, we should all have memorized by now. And if you don't, we need to put these into your mind. You should know 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 as decimals. So 1/4 is 0.25. And if you write it as a quarter is worth 25 cents, and 0.25 is how you would write 25 cents. And then 4/15. I can't reduce that. I can't make the denominator a 10, and I can't make the denominator 100. So I'm going to actually have to divide on this one. So 4 divided by 15. So I have 4, and I have to divide it by 15. So 15 does not go into 4, so I'm going to have to add a decimal and a 0, and a decimal goes up. So remember, dividing with fractions that you learn, or dividing with decimals that you learned in 6th grade with Mrs. Corso. Now 15 goes into 40. Well, that would happen not 3 times, that would only happen twice. 15 times 2 would be 30. And subtract that would be 10. I have to add another 0 to bring down. 15 into 100 would be 6. And 15 times 6 would be 90. And I bring that down, I subtract, I'm going to have 10 left over, I'm going to add a 0. I think I see a pattern here. 15 into 100 is going to go another 6 times. That would be 90. And this is just going to keep on going. The 6 is going to repeat. So the first restaurant, everybody is going to get a quarter of a quart. And the second restaurant, they're actually going to get 0.26 repeating, which is the same thing as 4/15 of a quart. And 0.26 repeating is just a little bit bigger than the 0.25. So which restaurant has the larger servings of soup? And it's the second restaurant by just a tiny bit.